Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by Councilmember Jamie Gaudier, Sean Mooring of the Lenfest Institute, and our own Lance Haber. We'll discuss the homestead exemption. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. Finally, a cold day. Looks like we're going to have a freeze. For all of us people who grow things, it's always nice to have the first hard freeze so we can get ready to start planting.
There you go. So there was a little bit of snow yesterday, which was fun. Hopefully, we'll see normal weather, but right. I don't know.
Not enough for the farmers and the gardeners. Need that hard freeze to kill everything before we can start planting for next spring.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we have a big show tonight, a lot of guests. We hope everybody had a nice holiday, and we're back to work. We have 3 weeks left of council. Tomorrow's session, December 7th, December 14th. And then council, normally is back, the second or third or fourth week of January. That's when council will most likely start again. But the swearing in for the mayor and the council will be January 2nd. And we'll have reports about that coming up. So a lot happening at the end of the year and early in 2024. So what we're going to start with tonight is our interview with Councilmember Jamie Gaudier, as we talk a little bit about some of her recent work and as a whole, what she's looking at in the past for council and what council might look like in the future. So here's our conversation with Councilmember Jamie Gaudier. All right, Councilmember Jamie Gaudier, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So the first big thing we want to talk about, this is exciting, the Reparations Task Force has been announced. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what you hope to achieve with it?
Yeah, so excited about this. In June, City Council came together to unanimously create the Reparations Task Force. And since then, I've been working with NCOBRA PHL to stand up the task force. And just a couple weeks ago, we launched the application process. So we're looking for 8, Philadelphians to join us on this task force, which will study and develop reparations proposals and programs for Black Philadelphians whose ancestors endured chattel slavery. And for me, the reason why this is important is because I feel like we can tie a direct line between the wrongs of slavery, this horrible sin against humans that happened in our country, all of the racist policies that came after slavery, which was never actually repaired, and the conditions of our neighborhoods today. So I think if you look at the gun violence that's happening in our community, the lack of investment that's happened in our community, it all sort of relates back to this original crime, which stole Black people's labor. And then in addition to, the country never offering redress for that, we came behind with a ton of other racist policies, including urban renewal, including redlining. And I think we need bold solutions that repair that harm and that, offer the opportunity or some level of opportunity that has been taken away from Black Philadelphians. So I'm very excited about this task force.
Right. And you hit it right on the head there. Slavery, as the definition of slavery, stopped, but discrimination never did.
Yeah.
And, you can still see it today, and it still exists today. So having this conversation is very important. So timeline wise, do you think that we're looking at a year, a couple of years before we have it together and these proposals come out? What do you think?
We don't have the exact timeline yet. That will be the job of the task force. We're very focused now on selecting these 8 community members to work with us. We plan to have that work done, and we plan to launch the actual task force in Black History Month. And I think it will be up to the task force to decide, what we need to look at, what conversations we need to have with the community in order to recommend, concrete steps, financial and otherwise, that not only the city, but the state and federal government too can take to eradicate the chokehold that slavery still has on our society, and on the conditions of the Black community today. So I don't have a concrete timeline. That will be one of the first things that the task force actually does, but we're excited to select those members and get started.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody would mind if it took a little while, just because you want to get it right. You want to spend the time.
Absolutely, this is important.
Absolutely. So, we're almost at the end of this fall council session, and almost at the end of your first term in city council. So, can you tell us a little bit about some of the big takeaways from this fall session, and then let's talk a little bit about the 4 years, which have been nothing. There's nothing ordinary about the 4 years that you had in your first term.
Yeah, the fall session has been interesting. We have a lot of new, colleagues in city council, and but even with new people on board, we continue to focus on, public safety issues, housing issues. I do think that the election also played a big role in the sense that council members have to focus on their elections in addition to being legislators. So it's kind of like you're juggling, all of that at the same time. But, still, we got, some good work done this fall. And I'm excited about what the next term will bring with our new council members and our new mayor as well.
So let's talk about that. How do you prepare to have new colleagues on council and have a new mayor? Is it just business as usual, or is there a different approach? Do you have to spend time thinking about this? How does this work for you?
I think it's a lot of relationship building, and just identifying the spaces where we can work together. I've traditionally focused on housing, so I want to continue to build out my bench in that affordable housing space, offer myself as a resource to my colleagues, and work on some good things with my colleagues. And I think that opportunity exists. I've also focused a lot on public safety. This year, this session, I've tackled 911 response and just making sure that the city's 911 system has what it needs to function, so that when citizens and residents call 911, someone picks up the phone every single time, and that help arrives in, fast and accurately. I think I have a lot in common with other council members that care about that issue. I've also focused on the Juvenile Justice Center, improving the conditions within PJJSC and making sure that there's more opportunity for our young people when they come out of PJJSC, and also ensuring that we're not sending young people to detention if we don't have to. I know that many of my colleagues share that concern as well. And so it definitely looks a lot different around City Hall. There are a lot of new faces, but I think the recipe is the same, in that you build relationships with people and try to find the areas where you can work together and have success.
And speaking of the 911 operators, you chaired a very interesting hearing last week or the week before. It's all running together now, but it's a really important hearing. And some of the things that came out of that, I don't know that people were aware of, the pay versus the stress of the job. Do you think that, we're a little ways away from budget, and but we are going to get there. Do you see city council advocating for more pay and more, I don't want to say concessions, but a more of an understanding of what 911 operators go through, and using that towards recruitment and trying to make sure that we're fully staffed there?
I do. I think this is something that we're going to get done. So one, this has been an issue that has plagued the city for quite a long time. And, there was another hearing several years ago about this same sort of 911 issue. What prompted me to jump in on this issue in the way that I have is the response to the King Sessing mass shooting, which just showed how disastrous things can, how disastrous it can be when we don't have sort of the appropriate systems, staffing, and resources in place for the 911 call center. And so I also think that the hearing went really well. I think it was a good thing not to only have the perspective of PPD, but to talk to the dispatchers themselves, and to hear from community members about what their experiences have been. And I have been talking to a lot of my colleagues, and feel like I have the support of a majority of them in pushing this issue forward. I've also been able to talk to folks in the incoming administration. So I actually talked to Kevin Bethel today, and I have his commitment that this is going to be a priority for him upon starting. So I'm excited about the ways in which we can move this work forward, and make the system better for all of Philadelphia.
All right, I'd like to bring in Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, council member. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Denise. Thank you for having me.
I guess my first question, and I'm just doing this for the audience members who might not know what NCOBRA is. Could you talk a little about NCOBRA and why they're central to this discussion on reparations?
Sure. So NCOBRA, and I think I'm going to get this right, the National Coalition of Blacks, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. I'm so sorry. I mostly call them by their acronym. So they've been working across the country on reparations, and they have a chapter here in Philadelphia that's led by Brianna Moore and Rashawn Williams. And these are brilliant young people that have been pushing this issue forward in the city. They are the ones who originally came to me and asked me to put forward the legislation around the task force. And they've just been, great partners in moving this forward ever since then. And they also bring a wealth of knowledge around how this has played out in other cities and across the world. Brianna actually just came back from a reparations conference in Ghana. And so for me, that highlights that this is about people all over the diaspora that are asking for justice, right, in our communities. And it really helps to also put the Philadelphia work in context. So NCOBRA has been great partners in getting this off of the ground and in making sure that we understand how, our work fits in with this larger global movement.
Okay. Now, when I was a student at Temple, Chuck D from the group Public Enemy came and spoke as part of Black History Month.
Okay.
And he said that reparations in his mind would come in the form of media outlets, because the people that could determine how they're portrayed in the media is a strong people. What would reparations in Philadelphia look like to you? Would it be fine? Would it just be like people getting a check? Would it be some combination of people getting a check and improve city services? Would it be at the final end of redlining? What would reparations look like to you?
I think the sky is the limit, and I don't think it's up to me to define. I think it's up to the community to define, right? But I think it could look many different ways. It could include financial reparations. It could be about housing. There's been so much sort of grave injustice and racial discrimination in the housing market that has kept Black Americans and Black Philadelphians back. It could be about education and access to education. It could be about capital for small businesses. It could be about media access. I think that's the task of the task force to figure that out.
Now, do
And
you,
it's looked different ways in different places as well.
okay. Now, when you decided that you were going to take this on and you were approached about taking it on, there are other communities that have addressed reparations and are doing active reparations programming. Did you talk to them? And if so, what did you learn that you're hoping Philadelphia can use?
So Brianna and Rashawn have done a lot of this research, but I have been able to, meet and talk to someone from the Japanese American effort to get, they're the only sort of group that has gotten reparations in our country. So they've been able to lend their voice and their experience to the effort. And they also were we did a press conference last week, sort of launching the application that they spoke at as well. And I think we learned that, this is absolutely a worthwhile effort, but that it's also important what this looks like and getting it right. And that it doesn't take away all of the pain that is associated with that original sin, but it does matter to people and can be something that moves the community forward. And so we've had some of those conversations and looking forward to continue to learn from the experience of others. I was also honored to be at a lecture last week at Penn with Sir Bickles, who's the Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies. He's a leading voice on reparations throughout the Caribbean and Africa. So it's also been interesting to hear about how this has played out and move forward in those places too. And I think there's a lot for us to learn from.
Okay, now, how can people apply to be a part of the task force? If someone wanted to be a part of the task force, how could they apply?
Sure. So people should go to rep215.com and they will see, information about the task force and the various positions. We're looking for 8 positions. The positions are fairly specific. There's an economic justice coordinator, a public and post-secondary education coordinator, a health and wellness coordinator, an Atlantic World History coordinator. So we're looking for folks that have sort of knowledge and interest and passion in these various areas to drive the task force along. But all of that is detailed at rep215.com.
Okay. And my last question, you're going into a new council session where council is going to look almost completely different than it did when it came in. It on paper, it would seem to be a more progressive council because of, particularly the inroads that the Working Families Party has made and some of the new people coming in. Do you see it that way? And if so, do you think that this will be to you that some of the more progressive things that you wanted to do and couldn't get done in this session might be able to get done in the next session?
Well, first of all, I want to give some kudos to our little progressive block that we had. I feel like we got some amazing things done. In my first 4 years of council, we passed the Emergency Housing Protection Act. We kept thousands of renters in their homes during COVID. A lasting testament to that is the eviction diversion program that has dramatically reduced evictions in Philadelphia. We have, fought for and won record amounts of money for gun violence prevention and for parks and rec centers and libraries. We expanded mental health response, the mobile crisis units that respond when someone's having a mental health crisis, as opposed to having armed officers respond. So I say all that to say that I'm proud of, the work that the progressive bloc, I would include, myself, Councilmember Brooks, former Councilmember Gim, and other council members, depending on the issue. We've been able to drive a lot of stuff forward in my first term. And moving into, the second term for myself and Councilmember Brooks, I'm excited about the new people joining. I'm excited about Nick. I'm excited about Rue. I worked with Rue on the Emergency Housing Protection Act when she was at the Fair Housing Commission, right? So excited to have her expertise and counsel. But I'm not just also relegating myself to a progressive bloc. Like I consider, myself a progressive, but I'll work with anybody on the issues to serve my community in the city. And so as I'm thinking about 911 response and reforming that system, as I'm thinking about juvenile justice and how we make sure that our young people have what they need to stay out of a path of violence and get the support they need in our communities, as I'm thinking about continued action on quality of life services and making sure that is equitable in Black and Brown neighborhoods. Progressives can rock with me on those things, but so can a lot of other people. And that's the type of partnership that I'm welcoming in my next term.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
Thank you.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Denise. And Councilmember Gaudier, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Nice to talk to you guys as always.
All right. We'd like to thank Councilmember Jamie Gaudier for joining us on the program. And she'll be back with us in the springtime before budget, hopefully, because we're going to hear about those budget priorities and all that's going on. Now, do we have Denise Clay Murray with us? There's a message in the chat. We don't. All right. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to play the interview Denise did yesterday with Sean Mooring of the Lenfest Institute and the Every Voice, Every Vote project, of which Hall Monitor was a part. So here's Denise's interview.
Hi, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 and on Philly Cam Television. And if you're looking for me tonight, I am probably not going to be on because I'm going to be at the Every Voice, Every Vote gathering for all the folks that participated in the Lenfest program that was designed to get more voters out to the polls during the 2023 elections. And I am here with Sean Mooring of Lenfest Institute, one of the people that was in charge of Every Voice, Every Vote. And thank you so much for being with us, Sean. And I guess my first question for you is, talk a little bit about the genesis of Every Voice, Every Vote. How did it come together? And how did it come together, and how do you think it went?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Always glad to be engaged and talk about our work. So Every Voice, Every Vote was a initiative that really spurred out of our leadership, as well as Sean McCaney at the William Penn Foundation coming to us to look at another take at what was called the Next Mayor Initiative some years ago in Philadelphia, where they took a look at the role of media and the role that media plays in civic education and civic engagement. And so what we did was really kind of took another stab at what had been done in the past and really kind of ramped it up. And one added component to this initiative that wasn't in the original was to also engage community partners. And so we provided about $1 million in grant funding to media organizations and a little over $500,000 to community organizations to really look at programming that focused on debates, on town halls, on translation efforts, and outreach in civic education and civic engagement. And so we were able to really, I think, kind of flood the networks with content, right? We invested in research that was used to help and share that research with all of the participants, both media and community, and allowed them to really kind of shape some of the debates and forums that were had. We translated voter guides and were able to also create this backbone entity around the coalition that gathered monthly and shared ideas and shared learning and shared lessons. So it was really a very comprehensive effort.
And in the interest of full disclosure, Philadelphia Hall Monitor, which you're all listening to and watching right now, was one of the participants in Every Voice, Every Vote. And basically, you all were kind enough to fund our poverty coverage in terms of the elections. Now, you said that there was a research base to what ultimately became Every Voice, Every Vote. What kind of research was it, and what was the most intriguing or interesting thing that you found in that research that we might be able to use for future coverage of campaigns or future campaigns, period?
Yeah, so when I say research, so it was a public opinion poll that we funded, and the effort was done by we partnered with Pew Charitable Trust and to kind of give us played an advisory role, and we kind of built and shared some questions with their annual survey of the city, kind of look at the state of Philadelphia. We also partnered with Temple University's polling and research arm, as well as SSRS, who did the quantitative analysis. And so we looked at that study to really get an engagement with, I think we wound up polling over 1,500 individuals from every zip code in the city to really get a clear understanding of what people's perceptions of Philadelphia were in terms of the critical issues, how they engaged civically. Did they know who their council person was? Were they likely to vote? And really what they saw as the critical issues facing our city at this point. And I think, not surprisingly, issues around crime and safety were at the top of the list. Issues around infrastructure, potholes, trash pickup, snow removal, those types of things also showed up. But it was also interesting to see where the differential was, how it broke down by income, how it broke down by race, in terms of where those key issues, those kind of key 5 things, right, around safety, crime, education, drug use, infrastructure issues. But depending on what the communities were, those things kind of shifted in ranking. And then also we, engaged in some, folks about lifting up solutions, whether it be, investment in mental health issues or increased funding to the police department. And that also had some differential by neighborhood, as well as by race.
Now, what I found most interesting about participating in this project was the number of local news outlets that I didn't know existed that, I got to connect with as a part of this project. Now, as the Lenfest, Institute does a lot of funding of local journalism, particularly here in the city. And that's great because we talk a lot about how local news isn't getting the love that it used to from like major chains or anything like that. Is there anything that we could take from Every Voice, Every Vote that we might be able to extrapolate in terms of local media and how to sustain it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we were very adamant about with Every Voice, Every Vote is just that, right? Is that we were really interested in ensuring that we were engaging with communities that weren't typically, on the radar. So while we did work very closely with, 6ABC and WRD and Tribune and Inquirer and all of those folks, but we also had smaller outlets. We had Hall Monitor, we had, the Metro, we had, folks in Northeast Philly. And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to engage with and provide the same information. We had the aggregate website, all of the articles that were funded or voter education guides that were funded through Every Voice, Every Vote were available outside of a paywall, and were republishable by other partners. And so a hall monitor article could be carried in the Inquirer, or the Inquirer would share data that the hall monitor could publish from their analysis of the survey. And so we think that there's definitely a lot of lessons that will come out of this that can be applicable to other cities that are looking at supporting civic engagement. But we also think the collaborative journalism model that we shared and employed to run Every Voice, Every Vote, could also provide some lessons for how we can continue this work. And then I'm excited to say that we will be continuing this model of Every Voice, Every Vote into the post-election. And so as we get ready in the new year for the administration to take office and to begin governing, we'll continue with this coalition with a slightly different focus around civic engagement and what that will look like. And what does it look like to engage both community organizations as well as media, not only to hold our officials accountable to what they've articulated and promised during the election cycle, but also what's the role of the community to become more civically engaged and to see these efforts through. So where our focus is on cleaner communities, what's the role, what's the opportunity for your average citizen to become a part of the process, and not only just kind of wag the finger, but also understand what entities play a role in passing the budget per se, or in community policing. What are all of the opportunities to be civically engaged, to hold folks accountable, but then also to make sure that we have a clear understanding of and knowledge of the process.
Okay. And my last question is about those community collaborations, because there were a lot of community groups that got either technical assistance or funding from Every Voice, Every Vote to put on the myriad of forums that we had. What was that experience like in terms of in terms of dealing with community groups that were, I guess, doing a media function, but weren't necessarily media?
Well, no, they weren't necessarily media. And one thing that I think we've definitely learned over the years is that their communities' relationship with media in some cases have been fraught, right? There's been instances where communities have felt harmed, or felt as though they were exploited by media, or just don't feel connected to mainstream media. And so we were very purposeful in engaging communities that had close ties to their neighborhoods, right? And where there may be opportunities for a large outlet or a small media outlet to partner with a community group that may have better relationships, closer ties to communities, and whether it be reintroducing or amplifying, or just engaging to provide an audience, and to make sure that those community voices are lifted up and engaged in the process. And so that was our thinking, and I think worked very successfully in that, really kind of partnering in marriage of media and community through this effort.
Okay, thank you so much, Sean, for agreeing to come on with us. And also thank you for allowing Philadelphia Hall Monitor to be a part of Every Voice, Every Vote, because we got as much out of it as you all did, in that we were able to do some things that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise without the help you all gave us. So thank you very much. And we appreciate your coming on. This is Sean Mooring. He is not just a person at the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. He is the head of Philadelphia programs, which means he manages a lot around here. So thank you so much for taking some of your time out and joining us today.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
You too.
All right. We'd like to thank Denise Clay Murray, who is here with us now, I believe. Denise.
Hi.
Hello. Denise, thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I'm at the Every Voice, Every Vote partner gathering right now at the Comcast Technology Center. And I kind of knew that Sean would probably be like really crazy busy and you know, and wouldn't be able to talk to us live. So I wanted to make sure that folks kind of got an understanding of how important that program was, especially to what we were trying to do in terms of getting issues of poverty out on the table for people to understand and for people to consider when they go into the polls.
That's right. And we want to thank the Lenfest Institute for their generosity and their help. So it was good to hear that. And it's good to hear that this is going to continue in some way, shape, or form going forward.
Yes, the focus is going to be on what the candidates told us as part of Every Voice, Every Vote, like what they said at the forums and the various things that happened, you know, as a part of that. It's about accountability now. It's about community engagement. It's about making sure that what we started in terms of getting people to understand that in the end, the people have the power, how that manifests itself.
That's right. That's right. Well, Denise, thank you so much for that. And we have a lot to do on the accountability side. The real work begins now, I think, and holding our government accountable, which is what we do here. And speaking of which, Lance, yesterday in our newsletter, you published a piece about the homestead exemption. And, you know, we want to hear a little bit about that and some of the other things that are going on with property assessments.
Well, I think it's a great segue. Many of us think that voting is enough. And unfortunately, one day a year of civic engagement is not nearly enough to make sure the government understands what we want and the government serves our purpose. What I'm going to report upon this evening is the homestead exemption. And the reason why I'm going to focus on that today is the deadline for applying for it is this Friday, December 1st. And if we could call up the slideshow, I'd appreciate it. Great. So many people know what the homestead exemption is. They know it's something about real estate tax, but they may not be really understanding what's going on. First thing to make clear is it is a tremendous savings. If you get the home, if you live in your home, you own your home and you live in it, and you qualify, which means you automatically qualify for the homestead exemption, and you file and ask for it, it means that you're going to save $1,119 a year, every year going forward. Once you apply for it and you receive it, you don't have to apply for it every year. And it's not a charity program. It is a program that is an attempt to make the real estate taxes fairer, more just, more progressive. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So as I said, if you don't have it, you should make sure you apply for it by December 1st. It's just way too much money to leave on the table. Now, we know that there are a lot of us who don't have it. And the reason we know that is the city of Philadelphia tells us. So these are the actual answers from the press office, from the mayor's office. There are 266,430 people, homes, families, who receive the homestead exemption. And of course, that number changes a little bit now and then. People move out of the city, people move from homes into apartments. Nothing is static. Things change, but the major part of the number remains the same. What's scary, though, is that there are actually 338,868 owner-occupied homes. That means that 22% of us qualify for the homestead exemption and don't get it. 1 in 5 families who should be getting this $1,200 a year savings are not getting it. Now, some people think of it as a charity, or they think it has something to do with income. And there are programs in the city that are based on income. There's the LOOP program, there's the Senior Citizen Tax Freeze. Those programs are based on income. And if you're fortunate enough to have a middle-class income, you're not going to qualify for either of those programs. But this program has nothing to do with that, has nothing to do with the size of your family, your income, your age, or anything else. It has to do with how we set taxes in the state of Pennsylvania. So there are really 3 parts to our property taxes. The first part is, do you have to pay taxes at all? So there are multi-billion-dollar businesses or industries or universities who don't pay any property taxes. The University of Pennsylvania is exempt from its property tax. So that's the first thing. Most of us have to pay property tax. Nonprofits don't. Doesn't matter whether it's a small nonprofit like the Lenfest Foundation is funding, or a significant nonprofit like the University of Pennsylvania. They don't have to pay any property tax.
And Lance, just to expound on that a little bit, I believe about 25% of the real estate in the city is not taxed because it has an exemption of some sort.
That's right. And that is another story, because there's a question about places like the University of Pennsylvania that have real estate that's not paying taxes, but may have professors in those buildings that are also running for-profit businesses. And it becomes somewhat of a question of what percentage of the building is exempt and what percentage of the building should be paying taxes. But that's not what we're going to report on tonight. You're absolutely right. That's a very significant issue. The second part of what property taxes are is what's called the value of the property. And that's set not by the sale price, but by an assessor that the city hires. City hires someone we don't know their name normally. They're not accountable to us. We don't really know anything about them, but they decide what your home is worth. They say they have some way of doing that based on what the other houses in the neighborhood are selling for. But of course, what that does is it means that as more people are moving in, the longtime residents see their property assessments go way up. The third part is the tax rate, and that's set by city council. And that's a mill rate. That's what we multiply the value of the house by. So it's currently 1.3998%. So 0.013998 we multiply times the value of the house. And the way the homestead exemption works is you remove the first $80,000 from what the assessor says the home is worth, and then multiply the tax rate by that amount. So if your house is worth $200,000, you would not pay real estate taxes on the first $80,000. The $120,000 assessed value that is left after the $80,000 reduction will be taxed at the current rate. The value of the exemption, as I said, is $1,120. Now, what this means is that the tax rates are more just. So if you own if you're fortunate enough to own $1 million homes, you get the same $80,000 reduction, but it means that your percentage that you save is much smaller. So just to make the numbers really easy and simple, if your house is worth $160,000, and I know there are not a lot of houses in the city of Philadelphia that are worth that little or that small amount anymore, then you would pay you would get a 50% tax break. You would get $80,000 off because of the homestead exemption, and you'd pay taxes on $80,000. If your home is worth $1.6 million, and surprisingly, there are a number of homes in the city of Philadelphia that sell for that amount, you would get the same $80,000 exemption, but you'd be paying taxes on $1.52 million. You wouldn't get a 50% break, you would get a 5% break. Now, why we do it like that is to make the tax system more fair. Taxes are the price that we pay to preserve the status quo. Most of us recognize that the more fortunate you are, the more wealth you have, the more interest you have in maintaining the status quo. People who are really struggling, people who are living in poverty, people who don't have a home are more likely to be willing to look at significant changes in the structure of our society because they don't have anything to protect. It's kind of like if you have a very fancy car, you're going to pay more for insurance for that car than someone who has a regular car. Fancier car, more to protect, you're going to pay more. Your insurance rates are going to be at a higher percentage because your car has greater value. The federal government understands that, even under Trump and under Nixon and under Bush and under Obama and under Clinton, the federal tax rates are graduated. The more that you make, the higher the tax bracket you're in. It's not a flat tax. It's not 5% no matter what you make. It's 5% if you don't make very much, 10%, 20%. And yes, the brackets change from year to year, from government to government, but they remain graduated. Pennsylvania doesn't do that. We have what's called a flat tax, the same percentage, no matter what you make, no matter how many homes you own, no matter how much wealth you have. And that's because written into the Pennsylvania Constitution is a uniformity clause that requires it. Now, even the state of Pennsylvania recognizes that this is an unjust system and tries to do something to make it fairer. So they exempt from sales tax basic necessities: most food, most clothes, most products used to grow crops or keep livestock, and most period products. And I just put that on there because, shockingly, 17 states charge sales tax on tampons. I'm going to say it again. 17 states don't believe that period products are a basic necessity of life and charge sales tax on them as if they're a luxury. So as I said, the homestead tax makes the system more just, gives bigger breaks to people who are living in neighborhoods where the prices are struggling and the neighborhood might be struggling. And it really asks people who are living in much more expensive housing stock to pay a higher percentage. So if the state of Pennsylvania understands that its flat tax isn't really fair and it exempts certain things from the sales tax, and the city of Philadelphia understands that the real estate tax is unfair and has a homestead exemption, why doesn't everyone who qualifies get the exemption? Why is it that we have so many people, 20%, 1 in 5, who would qualify but aren't getting it? And part of the difficulty is that the city calls it a program that is there for people who need help, and it's not. It's very difficult to find out whether your home is listed. It is true that when the city sends out its annual letter saying what your assessed value of your home is, if you go down 3/4 of the way of the page, it will tell you whether you have a homestead exemption or not. But the reality is, most of us pay our real estate taxes through our mortgage. So that letter we get is not a letter that we keep or that we look at or that we really spend a lot of time figuring out what it means. It's not at the top. It doesn't remind you to apply for it. It doesn't say, here's how much you could save if you had it. All it says is, this is what your house was assessed at, and this is what's going on. So you have to go online, and it's not easy. You have to visit the webpage, you have to click, then you have to put in your property address, then you have to click again, then you have to click one more time and say that you're looking for a program that's to help. And again, it's not to help. We don't know whether that's part of the reason why few people, there are 20% of us who aren't applying, because there's the belief that this is something to do with income or something to do with ability to pay and not something to do with justice. Now, as we talked about earlier with the council member, this year, a new government's going to take over, new mayor, new city council, And as Denise was talking about with the Lenfest Foundation, there's going to be some interest in what this new government is going to do. And that raises the question, what's going to happen to neighborhoods that are seeing a tremendous influx of building and a tremendous increase in prices? In the last 2 years, there have not been new assessments. The city of Philadelphia stopped reassessing the properties this year, so everybody is now 3 to 4 years behind on what the assessor says the property is worth. The first question is the new administration going to go ahead and have a new assessment? Now, there is no legal mandate to do so, but one of the hidden things that people often overlook is the city's ability to borrow is based on the assessed value of the properties. So when former Mayor Michael Nutter moved to what's called a full value initiative, and it used to be that the values were a percentage of the market value. When he moved to the full market value, one of the creative reasons to do that was it increased the amount of money the city could borrow every year without having to put it on the ballot. So every time the city increases the assessments, the city can borrow more money going forward. In every other part of the state, when there's a new assessment, that new assessment has to be what's called revenue neutral. So if the property values go up, the tax rate has to go down. In Philadelphia County, that's not true. If the tax assessments go up, the tax rate stays the same, and the city has both more money coming in for its operating budget and has the ability to borrow more money going forward. So we don't know. That's a question going forward. What's the city going to do to help people stay in their neighborhoods, to help make sure that working people can continue to buy homes in Philadelphia, and really do what we can to make sure Philadelphia remains a city of neighborhoods? Are we going to do another assessment? And if we do another assessment, will the amount that's exempted stay at $80,000? Now, at one point, it was much lower. It was $45,000. Council President Clark, when he looked at the new assessments, recommended that go up to $90,000. The school district actually complains that if you go up to $90,000, that'll hurt the school budget, and the number came back down to $80,000. It almost doubled. And for many people, that increase in $35,000 from where the exemption was to where it is now made up for the jump in their real estate taxes. So that's a second issue that we'll have to continue to look at. And the third issue is the issue of how we set property taxes. Now, again, I recognize that this gets somewhat confusing, but I'm going to go over it one more time. There is an assessor, someone who goes around and tries to figure out what your house is worth. That person is supposed to be evaluating your house based on what they call comparables, what other people are paying for houses in your neighborhood. What that does, of course, is create a tremendous burden on longtime residents when the people who are moving into the new home still get the tax abatements and are able to pay more because they're not paying real estate taxes. And then the assessor says, well, look, that new house just sold for $450,000. So your house, even though it's not new, is worth close to that. It's worth $400,000. But the person who buys the $450,000 home isn't paying real estate taxes. So they get a break. The person who's living in the home who sees their assessment goes up doesn't get that break. And as a result, the entire system is skewed against longtime home residents. Now, there is, again, the LOOP program, but that is income-based and has a formula that's very difficult to qualify for. So the new administration is going to have to answer the question, is this the best way to set real estate taxes in the city? To have an unnamed, unaccountable assessor decide what your home is worth? Or is the best way to do it based on what the market says the house is worth? Now, it is true that the city of Philadelphia would have to either ask for the legislation to be changed or would have to mount a legal challenge to the way property taxes are set to bring relief for longtime property owners. But there's no reason why they can't. So again, the value of your house, we know what the value of your house is when you bought it. Very simple. You agreed to pay this amount, that's the value of your house. 2 years later, someone comes around and says, your house has gone up in value. It's now worth almost twice what you paid for it. That's an estimate. That's not the market value of the house. And if we're going to move to the actual value of the house, which is supposedly where we are, then there's only one way to know what the actual value of the house is. That's at the strike point. That's the point at which the house is sold. And so those are the issues that the new mayor and the new council are going to have to talk about. One, are we going to have a new assessment? I think the answer to that is almost definitely yes. Two, are we going to raise the homestead exemption? And I don't think we will unless people are actively challenging their assessments and actually participating in our government, saying you can't force people out of their homes because they secured their neighborhood, because they got rid of the short dumping, because they were able to fill in the vacant homes and put families in, because they were able to clean up their streets and their parks. Those people can't be punished because of all the work that they did. So unless that happens, I don't know that what we're going to see is an increase in the homestead exemption. And the third is, will the city look realistically at how this process has hurt longtime homeowners? And will the city decide to challenge the process by which it was done? And we'll continue to report upon that. But again, if you are somebody who is not sure whether you have the homestead exemption, please go to our webpage, click on the information there, and make sure you have it. It is worth your time. Unlike many programs which you probably won't qualify for, unlike other programs where the savings is nominal, this is a program which will, if you live in your home, if you own the home you live in, no matter what your income, no matter what your age, no matter the size of your family, you qualify for the homestead exemption, and you will save $1,190 simply by clicking on and applying for it. But to get that discount this year, you have to apply by December 1st.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for walking us through that. I remember budget hearings a couple of years ago. The Office of Property Assessment was having their budget hearing the same day the new assessments came out. And city council members were questioning them in real time about, my constituents are saying this. What are you doing about it? Well, that's the formula. Well, what's the formula? We don't talk about the formula. So there are always a lot of questions there, and I agree with you. I think there is going to be another assessment, and I don't know what they're going to do about it. If it's homestead exemption, if there's some other reduction in the property tax, I don't know. But I feel safe to predict that there will be another assessment because they're supposed to do it every year.
Well, so I checked on that, and there's no legal requirement for them to do it every year.
Mm-hmm.
The danger is that some real estate speculator sues the city and says, you didn't do it this year, and I have bought a home and purposely left it abandoned.
Yeah.
And so my property taxes should go down. Mm-hmm. Now, it's been many years since we've had people like Sam Rappaport buy up major parts of the city and let them fall into disrepair so he could lower the property values. But that's the danger not doing a reassessment, that the real estate speculators who buy up properties and leave them vacant are being from their point of view, being overtaxed because they've let the house fall into disrepair, and therefore it should be devalued.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we would like to thank all of our guests, Councilmember Jamie Gaudier and Sean Mooring from the Left Hess Institute, for being with us. Denise, thank you, as always, for the interview with Sean and for the interview with Councilmember Gaudier. Lance, thank you so much for your work. Next week, we will discuss in depth the new police commissioner, the announcement that was made, and we'll be back next week on Hall Monitor.